To the flag first.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Liz Moulton isn't able to attend tonight, so I'm going to chair the meeting. We're here with the Finance Committee to discuss budgets, and that's the only thing basically on our agenda right now. Heather, do you want to start the process?
I am more than happy to do so. Oh, good. All right, so just to give people a really brief background on this, so what's been happening for this year and the past year is the Finance Committee and the Finance team, which consists of the treasurer, the town accountant, myself, and usually someone from the assessor's office and someone from the Finance Committee whenever possible. We've been meeting on these budgets, I think, since about October. This year we tried to attempt to do a zero-based budget, which is a notion that allows us to get to see what folks are actually putting in their budget and what they're projecting, and kind of an itemized list. From there, what happens once March came, we got the cherry sheets and net school spending numbers, so we had some basic numbers to begin our revenue process. We always start the process with figuring out the revenue, and then we go to the expenses once we move forward. We kind of do both of those independently. As much as you think we do them together, we don't. Because you want to give the same stringent look at all of the budgets, regardless of how much money you have at the end of the day. And that seemed to actually yield us pretty decent results for the past couple of years. We'll go through the budget now in a few minutes. We've been meeting for, I think, with the Finance Committee as a whole, with the Finance team now for several weeks, if not much longer. Mike would have a better tally than I do. It seems like for a very long period of time, is all I can tell you. And as of tonight, we're at least at a balanced budget. There was some information that's come up since, or at the end of the meeting on Monday night, that is now going to be on the discussion plate for tonight, because we're going to have to figure out how to address it. But we'll begin here. So FY17 proposed budget, revenues. All right, so you're looking here at a chart of, I don't know if we can pull that. Let's see, Mike, would you be able to see if you can pull the projector screen down anymore? Because I don't know if we can angle the projector. I just don't want things to be cut off. You can angle, so the question is, does it go down further or is it down? It's down. Okay. And I don't know if we have...
No, I put steel brackets in.
There's a remote in front of John. I don't know if that shifts it at all. You're going to stand and hold it, Mike?
No, wait. All right, so can you do that?
There you go.
Now we have a curved budget.
Uh-oh. John pushed a button.
That button didn't do it.
All right. Thank you, Chief.
It says
Excellent.
I can resize it. Want me to try to resize it?
That's okay. I think this will work. As long as Paul, is it working okay on your screen? Cool. All right, so we have FY15, FY16 estimated, and FY17 revenues you see on this bar graph here. You have 15.2, 15.2, and 15.6. That doesn't necessarily mean our revenues have naturally in and of themselves gone up. It actually more so means that we've had to put more money in the other sources of revenue section to balance this year. Couple notes. First one is new growth. There was a lot of concern about our new growth numbers, I mentioned a little earlier. The state aid, we still have unknown certainty on this piece. The House Ways and Means Committee just came out with their numbers, which are different in many ways from that which was previously proposed by the governor. We will not have final numbers until July, so we try to do our best based on our guesses of the numbers on the table, but any of these can change. Ambulance fees. Every year we generally put in ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation. Funds that are collected as ambulance fees when the ambulance goes out and takes calls goes into this account. Each year we use $25,000 of that fund to put towards ambulance stabilization account, which is a stabilization account purely for the purpose of being able to fund a new ambulance when the day comes. The rest of the funds can be used for this purpose to go into the revenues. they at no time can exceed the amount of expenses actually spent for the ambulance department, ambulance-related expenses, wages, on-call, ambulance software, etc. So as of Monday night, when we had previously met, our current balance for the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation account was at approximately $177,000. Donna processed a few of the receipts today, and it appears to be about $15,000 higher, which we can address a little bit later. So for right now, we're looking at $177,000 in the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation account. We were looking to take $25K out off the top for the ambulance stabilization account, and then we wanted to be conservative and leave about $10,000 in there, because each year we have about $4 to $6K that we end up spending on intercept calls. So you want to be safe and you don't want to spend more than you have in the account. So as of right now, when we go further, you will see that we have currently plugged in, as of Monday night, $142,000 from ambulance fees or ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation account. Tonight, we'll actually end up talking about potentially adding the additional revenue that was just processed today into those numbers. And the last piece you have here on my note is that our revenues have increased 2.96% from FY16. Revenue for the town of Southampton is made up of 4 pieces. You have your property tax levy, your state aid, your local receipts, and your other revenue. First chart you see up here is your property tax levy. You see 2013 or FY13 through FY17. The numbers are pretty much well calculated at this piece. You always see less overlay. The overlay in the bottom is the money that's reserved in the event that there's an abatement that needs to be handled in the assessor's office. It's the money for the abatement. Right now on the right-hand side under FY17 estimated, you see a red box. It's the number of $180,000. This is the number that is representing new growth. The concern from the Board of Assessors and the principal assessor is that we have overestimated the amount of new growth for this year moving forward into FY17.
You should be specific on the numbers. Mike was very emphatic about that.
Okay. Let me get there, Gary.
Okay.
Okay, so now you have your new growth history. See a scatter plot here with a trend line going down the center with the arrow. Up on the left-hand side, Vicki was kind enough to look these up for us earlier today. You have 2010, that's up in the 200s. In 2011, your number was above 200,000. In 2012, it was around 180, 183 I think it was more specifically. 2013, closer to 200. 2014, 180s again. 2015, close to 200,000. 2016, just over. And then you see the dot that's projected for 2017. The concern that we've run into, that everyone we have spoke to is on the page with of the concern, is this is one of those numbers we try to be relatively accurate with. You try to be conservative, but yet at the end of the day, if you're too conservative, you're talking about layoffs, and you don't want to have that happen if you end up being much higher than projected. The concern we have from just looking at the trend piece is that the lowest we've dipped going all the way back to 2010 was $181,000. So saying 110 just seems unrealistic. That being said, that may not necessarily be the case. Mike and Vicki had several conversations today pertaining to what the new growth estimate was, the number of houses. Their projections were last year we had about 20 new houses. This year it's projected to be about 10, which is about half. And a good portion of your new growth comes from your new buildings. So if you have half, that means if you were at 200,000 this year, you'd be closer to 100,000 next year. So that is a very big concern. So the next question then becomes, I'm going to go for two. What can you do about it? Well, the first option is we can reduce the figure for new growth to $110,000. That would mean we need to cut expenses by $70,000 or more, and or supplement with operating stabilization, which is a prior year's free cash, Option 2, reduce the figure somewhere between 110 and 180, which is, again, cut expenses and/or, I assume I meant supplement with operating stabilization, prior year's free cash. The third option is essentially going into the first two, which is some funding possibilities. First one, elementary transportation, we could reduce by another $10,000. The second one is we could increase the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation, as I previously mentioned, by the additional revenue that was allotted today, which is $15K. Third option is we've never actually spent the amount of overlay we've had for overlay reserve for the past several years, and we've done a conservative guess at 70. We could reduce it to 60, and that would increase the revenue side by, or increase the revenue side by 10,000. Or maybe it's a discussion of cutting a department, but these are the options that we saw earlier today to lay out. Or maybe there's another option, but that's what we came up with so far. Yes, John?
Just a question. You're saying we're projecting 10 new homes going up? Is that what you said?
That's the best projection. I left the sheet in my office, but Mike was able to actually pencil down every possible place that he knew of.
And he talked to the building inspector, I assume?
He talked to the building inspector, he talked to Vicki earlier as well.
Okay. Now, normally this time of year, we're projecting twice that, or is it just a different time of year we're looking at this?
I don't have the answer to the question. We've had a lot of turnover in those two departments, and even at 2 years in the building department, it's not a longevity piece. So the question really comes is, where are the numbers? I remember in previous years, I've had conversations with Rich, the former building inspector, who believed the number would be higher, and then Lori, the assessor, who believed the number would be lower, and it was like $70,000 difference.
I remember
So I don't know. I fear that we don't have a great handle on new growth, but at the same time, if that's the numbers they have, in addition to that, Vicki was looking at the amount of money coming in from the different houses. I think last year it was like 2 million, sorry. 2 million divided by about $100,000 value on each, which got you to 20 houses. This year we're looking at about 1 million. Charlie?
I was doing the research for the cable and the new growth in town based on the cable build-out. And one of the things I was seeing was there was a more aggressive approach to building permits being issued, and they have an upswing of building permits. Now, that's all building permits. That's garages, sheds, and whatever, but that's all new growth also. Does that come into play with this?
I don't have the answer to that question because that is not my field of expertise on new growth. That has been a discussion. It was partly a discussion on Monday night pertaining to new growth when we were informed that they thought the number would be lower. It's also been a discussion throughout the week on the same piece. I don't know. That's, like I said before, that's why I'm really cautious and really concerned with lowering a number so drastically when we've never statistically had anything that low. Doesn't mean we won't have it that low. One of the thoughts was, based on Mike's calculations, he was thinking we'd pull in about 80,000 from new building certificate occupancies, and the other 30K would come from those additions. And that would be your supplemental. Gary over here, you have to come speak at the podium, please, so they can hear you at
At some
home.
point, we need to hear from the assessor.
But would you like to come speak at the podium? That's what I'm asking. Thanks.
I assume this thing has a microphone on it. It's that square thing. Okay. The new growth, the Board of Assessors met just yesterday afternoon, and we went through, we looked at any possibilities here. New growth is something that, it's the only thing that the town has that can cause money, income over and above the Prop 2.5 levy ceiling. The problem is, as Heather explained very well, is that we simply don't have the additional new growth this year. And the thing that is going to bolster it even up to the 110 is that we have both our new assessor, Mike O'Connell, who was, incidentally, we did his review yesterday, and, you know, he came out with glowing results. He's done very well. But most of the two-thirds, or what, $70,000, $80,000 are expected to come out of this supplementary work that we're doing up until the end, you know, the first half or the end of this fiscal year. Now, that's the bulk of the new growth. And frankly, between Mike and we have a consultant who is very capable, who has worked for the town for about 20 years, Roy Bishop, we've got Bishop Associates working on this thing, along with Mike, and they're pretty confident they can come up with about the 80,000 or so. But between that, which is almost like a special assessment, it augments what we did previously. Between that and the 30,000 on the new growth, we're just playing games with numbers if we think we can go up much higher than that.
So you think we're even stretching it now?
I believe we can get the 110, as does Mike. We believe the 110 is a pretty solid figure. Beyond that, we're just fooling ourselves if we bring it, you know, much beyond that point. We've got to say that that's the figure. If we got 120, wonderful, but you can't count on it.
But you're not projecting anywhere near past years, obviously.
No. The other thing is the overlay that I did want to address. I don't know how many people are familiar, but we issue a lot of abatements during the course of the year. Most, you know, a lot of it is on motor vehicle. But sometime the end of May, we have a number of cases that are going to appear before the appellate tax board. Some are homeowners in town who have filed for abatements. They have not been granted the abatements that they like, and their next option is to bring it to the appellate tax board. That's the standard procedure. There's, you know, a potential of a few $1,000s that the town could lose depending on how that went. Our problem, the reason why we're reluctant to reduce the $70,000 estimated figure, our problem is that there are big, it's almost like a class action suit with the utility. We recently were able to be perfectly frank, I forget whether it's the telephone or the electric power, but one of them we've been able to, you know, the town has been able to assess and obtain revenue from that source, which is a fairly new thing. It's been appealed. It's in the appellate tax board, and that is one of the things that is going to be settled, and the town could lose some money if it goes the wrong way. And we're talking some serious money here. That's just why we're a little reluctant to let go of that $70,000. That's what I really wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Sure, you want to go?
Yeah, just looking at the funding options and speaking to the ambulancers.
You just want to introduce yourself
Oh,
so
I'm
people
sorry.
at home?
Yeah, John Workman, Fire Chief for Southampton. I just see the funding options up there. It's the first that I've heard about it through the receipts reserved appropriation, taking more out of the ambulance fund. And I guess I see concern with that in that the budget figures that I've seen come through have reduced wages in both the fire and the ambulance slightly. In the fact that the town had put forth to expand the ambulance service and signed an agreement with the state and never put any funding in place whatsoever. So we're, you know, the fire department budget, EMS budget has been level funded since I've been in the position. As I look at the new budget, without the second shift, if the second shift doesn't go through on a ballot question, there's not any money to even currently fund the extra standby, which we needed to put in place to meet the state mandate. That concerns me because if we don't at least minimally fund that second standby, I don't know how we're going to count on extra ambulance funds to come in and then take additional money out. It just doesn't make sense.
You remember how much that portion would be
The additional standby is about $34,000.
for a full
Yeah,
fiscal?
because we doubled the standby to get 16 hours worth of coverage, which met the state. The state wanted us to see us have coverage for all of the nighttime shift until we put the second shift in place. If the second shift isn't funded, then we're going to be, I used extra money that was in wages to bolster the standby account so that we could have personnel available for call. In the new year, if the second shift doesn't come through, we need to, again, put money into that standby account to do that stopgap measure. Would be my guess is the only way the state's going to continue to work with us.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else, or Mike?
I just have Michael Rosenberg, Chairman of the Finance Committee, 144 East Street. Just a question in regards to the ambulance receipts account along with the proposed fee increase, which the chief could talk to. So there is a proposed fee increase for ambulance, correct? Or is it implemented?
It's already implemented.
Okay. And so when we did the figure for that, I think it added an additional, was it $60,000 in revenue for ambulance receipts? So while we are taking money from, in this proposed option, we are taking money from the ambulance receipts fund, it will be backfilling itself with a higher return for ambulance trip.
So you're saying that additional $60,000 wasn't factored into the revenue side?
So ambulance receipts reserve, John, only come out, you can only spend what you have in the account. This isn't a projected account like other ones are. This account is set up, and Vicki can correct me if I'm wrong, solely for the purposes of funding the ambulance service. This is why this account exists in the first place. So when we take additional funds out of it to legitimately balance on the ambulance side is much more expensive than we're going to capture in $142,000 or $167,000, $57,000, what have you. That being the case, the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation, one of the biggest concerns that we've run into when we talked about this on Monday night was that we'd be depleting this account and there wouldn't be as much funds to go to next year. But as Mike has already touched on, the ambulance fees have increased, and the amount, whether we collect all of them or not is another thing, but you should steadily see that fund replenish itself over the next year. It may not be as high as it is now, but the question comes, I think the same one that the school committees had dealt with a few times over and over, which is, what do? Do you cut everything off right now, or do you try to get through and try to get to tomorrow and then see what happens? What's the best approach?
Is this going to deplete the ambulance fund entirely?
So
Reserve?
this is the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation. So this is where the ambulance fees come in.
Yep.
At town meeting that the board will vote on next week, I assume the vote will most likely be the same, is that we'll put $25,000 into the ambulance stabilization account, so someday, should we need an ambulance, we'll have one. We've had the stabilization account for about 3 years now, so I think it's about $75K in there. So over the next few years, we'll have enough for a new ambulance. In the meantime, we left $10,000 in the account that we did not want to touch because there are those occasional costs of the intercept fees, and that's where they come out of. The rest of the funds go into the town's budget so that they have to cross with the ambulance fees. They don't just go into the general fund and go away. They're actually in there to cover the cost of the ambulance side. I would hold off if we could, unless this is directly related to this piece. If it's on the actual expenses piece, if we could wait till we get to that budget, or we'll never make it through revenue.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I certainly recognize we need to move things along. It just concerns me if we're already overspending that ambulance account, that then we would appropriate more out of it, knowing that we're already going to expend it.
So, again, what I said is you cannot spend more than you have, so we have all the money in the account, completely legit, completely legal use and proper use of the funds to designate up to the amount we currently have in that account today. And today's account is, I think we said 177 plus, I think there was about 15K in revenue today that was transferred. 193. Okay, that's our total balance as of today. So we can spend up to $193,000. Do you have anything else, Chief?
Yeah, I guess, right now, our wages this year were about $180,000 plus expenses of about $40,000, plus a couple other expense line items that relate to ambulance. So we're already at 193 outspending that account.
Okay.
And I guess the thing is, this is an option that we got to look at later on down the road, so it doesn't mean it's coming out. But that's a good thought, thanks.
Okay, so we talked about some of these other issues, some of these other options down here, looking at the numbers. Elementary transportation, so this is one of the pieces. I don't know how much time the board wants to spend on this, or if they want to come to it later. But if this were an option, so as of right now, Vicki, I think, finally was able to speak with Bobby today from the school department, and they had continued to indicate that they wish to have the transportation line funded at the level it was funded at this year, plus the $10,000 contract increase. If you recall, a short while ago, the Hampshire Regional had decided to reduce one of the buses, I believe unbeknownst to the school committee from what I could tell. They reduced one of the buses and made a savings of approximately $20,000 or so for the fiscal year, but they wanted to reimburse families for the $11,000, half of it. As of this proposal, as of today, the school committee has asked us to continue, or not the school committee, I'm sorry, I don't mean to misspoke. The school administrative staff, Bobby Jones, had asked us to leave in the $20,000 from the bus that was taken out this year. When we spoke and discussed on Monday, we actually already took out $10,000 out of the transportation line, and this proposal says to take another $10,000 out, which would keep them at the same funding they are as of today, based on that bus being gone, and does allow for the $10,000 contract increase. That's one piece to get $10,000 back into the revenue side. The second thing is overlay. We mentioned that briefly. You could reduce the overlay by $10,000 with the agreement of the Board of Assessors. And the third one is ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation increased by another $10,000 or so, based on the change of the revenues as of today. So would you guys wish, does the board wish to further converse on this subject or come back to it after?
Why don't we go through it so then we can see the whole thing?
Okay, cool. State aid. So here you have the state aid. As we mentioned earlier, the biggest concerns is that we've used the most up-to-date House Ways and Means numbers, which means these could change from the governor's numbers, could change to some entirely different, but this is the most recent up-to-date numbers. So you will see charter tuition reimbursement, I think, is at $11,000. Chapter 70 increased to 2.5. Let's see, unrestricted governmental aid has increased slightly, and everything else for the most part has stayed. Let me see if I have any other notes here. Let's see, veterans benefits are reimbursed at 75%, so we had spent less last year. Overall, aid increased by approximately $79,000, and we will have final numbers from the state around July 1st. Any questions on this slide?
Just one of Chapter 90 money, Heather, I understand some of that can be used to defray operating expenses.
That's a conversation when we get to that budget, Gary, because it has nothing to do with the revenues we count on.
It's a revenue source.
But it's not. That's Chapter 70.
Heather,
Yes, sir.
people at town aren't hearing the question, so.
Oh, I'm
either
sorry,
maybe
the
you can
question that
repeat
was
it.
asked from the audience, from Gary Swanson, was, it was his understanding that Chapter 90 funds could be used to offset operating costs for the highway department. And I had mentioned that this is the state aid piece, and state aid does not account for Chapter 90. We don't budget in Chapter 90 funds. You won't see that in any part of this piece. It will become a discussion when we get to the highway department. John Fitzpatrick has a question.
Thank you. I assume that the legislature numbers are for the Chapter 70 and for the unrestricted. Are they 100% of what the legislature said, or are they in between?
They're more than what the governor's budget
I
was.
understand that, but are we budgeting between those numbers? Are we budgeting the
We plugged in at this point, Vicki can tell me if I'm incorrect, it's my understanding those are the numbers of the House Ways and Means.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they can't, You have to repeat the question, or the speaker has to go.
So the question was whether or not the numbers that are currently penciled in from the House Ways and Means Committee are actually the House Ways and Means Committee at the higher number, or whether they're a compromise between the House Ways and Means and the governor's budget. And the answer was these are the House Ways and Means numbers, meaning they're the higher numbers. So again, the uncertainty is there, because if for some reason they shift and go down, we reduce things. The good news is they're not much higher in Chapter 70. They're not much higher in unrestricted general governmental aid. Chapter 90 funds increased, I think I want to say, approximately $17,000, but I have the Smith number on my brain. But I want to say it was in that ballpark, because we actually had looked at what happens to the Chapter 70 net school spending formula, which we can get to when we get to the school piece. Other questions on this slide? Excellent, okay. Next up, we have local receipts. At the first glance, the revenues were down by about $45,000 from last year due to a couple changes. The first one being supplemental taxes are no longer accounted for in our budget here. We were advised by our auditors this year that we should not be counting supplemental taxes in the revenue under local receipts. Rather, they should be included in part of the calculation of new growth, which is what we spoke to about earlier with regards to building and then additional permits and the like. And then the second change is we did not estimate in busing fees for this year, because our last understanding from the school department, John, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, was that there was not an intention, as far as we knew, that there was going to be charging for busing fees in FY17.
School choice kids will still be charged.
So is that something we need to budget for, Vicki?
But that doesn't come directly to us, it goes to...
Again, nobody's hearing this at home,
So the discussion that's going on in the audience, John Fitzpatrick and Vicki Morrow, the accountant, were discussing school busing fees. So the question was whether or not the school department was planning to charge for school busing fees in FY17. The answer is there is still the belief that they will be charging school choice children, which will approximate about $11,000. The concern is that whether or not that goes directly to the school department or whether that passes through us in the process. And it seems to be the belief, my understanding is that it does not come to us, it goes straight to the school. Vicki, does that sound right? If you'd like to, I'm doing the best I can paraphrasing over here.
Vicki Morrow, Town Accountant. I'm not sure of that answer because we have never gotten that revenue if they have charged those fees to school choice students. They've never directly come to the town, so I would have to ask that question of if this is something new for school of choice or if it's something they've always done and it just got incorporated into the school's budget and not necessarily ours. I'm not sure of that answer.
And on the other half of the conversation you couldn't see. I believe the first time that we ever charged for busing was when we charged for busing last year, and we included school choice students in the charges, and we're not going to take them off of the charges going forward.
So those students were part of the 110 kids?
Correct.
Okay, all right, well, if that's the case, then we
Needs to
can
get a
make an
number.
adjustment. Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. That means we have potentially $10,000 on the income side. Life is getting better by the moment. Motor vehicle excise taxes are estimated to increase by about $10,000. License and permits are expected to increase along with departmental receipts. Court fines are expected to continue to increase, and miscellaneous reoccurring revenue has decreased. This is the subsidies. Is that the right word? The subsidies, they decrease because the loans decrease. Please don't ask me any more questions on that one because I made my notes and that was all I could tell you on that piece. Any other questions on this slide? Yes, Francine, do you want to come up and speak so I don't have to paraphrase for people at home? I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, I lose voice after like an hour.
No, Francine Tishman, 83 Glendale Road. I had a question on the previous slide. I just was getting caught up looking through the papers. But I noticed that the school choice receiving revenue on the previous slide was left blank. And when I look at the 16 fiscal year 16, it shows 272,000, but that's the revolving fund. Is that the same as the tuition?
So I can answer that question for you. So what happened was, when we modified this, we did not go back and modify through 2014. So last year, when we did the budget in 2016, we actually included all the things that were passing through on both the revenue side and the expense side. We were advised by the auditors that we do not need to show them passing through. So what ends up seeing is you see things like less state assessments down below, and that's essentially just taking them off. So essentially, I understand the question. The problem, the thing is, the reason you're seeing that is we didn't go backwards to FY14 and FY13 to format them the same as 15, 16, and 17. So on that line, it's not the best comparison.
I think she's looking at the expense report, the revenue report, the revenue report.
So on the revenue report, one of the things that happens to us with school choice is that they end up changing the numbers based on the kids that actually go, and our assessments actually change at the end. So this past year, we had budgeted for a lower number, and it ended up coming up higher. But there was nothing we can do. Am I answering your question, or do I need to?
I don't understand why we're not budgeting any revenue there.
Why we're not budgeting any revenue? Because it's a pass-through. That money is the school department's free cash. Does that make sense? Excellent. Okay. All right, local receipts. Any questions on this one that we just went through? Cool. Okay. Uh-oh. That's never a good sign, Charlie. What did I do?
Hit it again.
Ah, there we, is that, I think, my graphic is missing. Oh, no. Okay, we'll skip my graphic. Licenses, permits, and department receipts. You have 3 years of actual or 2 years of actual numbers, and FY16, FY17 are both estimated. Building permits and highway department and town clerks are expected to increase. Questions, concerns, or thoughts? We good to move on, John?
Go for it. This is estimates both years, so
Yes.
there's not much we can do here.
Excise taxes, here's our estimates. See, FY17 is at 865, which is a little more than 10,000 more than this year. Boat excise taxes are about the same. Other revenue. So this is the section where we incorporate a lot of things. We don't often spend from these accounts into the general budget piece, but they're accounted here anyway for the end of the year tallies of things. So the first one you see on FY17, septic betterment WPAT loans, so that's $20,401, that's just straight across the board. Ambulance special revenue fund, that is the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation, but we like to abbreviate things when we can. And that amount, as you see, is currently penciled in at $142,000. Water enterprise funds, the indirect costs, and the transfer enterprise funds indirect costs are both listed there as well. Prior years, you see higher numbers, because if you remember in FY16, we actually put all the revenue coming in from the enterprise funds, and then show the money going out later on. Again, we were advised by the auditors that we don't need to do that, because we vote for the water enterprise and transfer enterprise funds in separate articles about their expenses and their revenues, and we already vote on their indirect costs. So this is just placing their indirect costs into the general fund, so it's easier to account for. Questions? Okay. We already talked about that. FY17 expenses. So at the beginning of the year, the Board of Selectmen met back in October, and they talked about their goals for the FY17 budget. These are some of the things they came up with. They'd like to fund the second shift ambulance service. They would like to fund it in an administrative position for the fire department and one for the police department. They would like to fund a grant writer line. They would like to fund Norris to the net school spending level without reliance on indirect costs as part of the calculation. And they would like to fund the highway department at 52.2 weeks per year. The only two that we were able to, so far in the budget this year, partially achieve is the last two. Questions? Okay. Finance team, finance committee rules applied. So when the finance committee and the finance team sat down, we started going through the budgets. We had to agree on some rules to apply to all of these budgets so we could do everything fairly and across the board. First one we said is, as of right now, let's go with wages not to exceed 2% increase, no additional hours or new positions at this time, and fund at the minimum required levels for laws and accreditation. So this piece generally applies to the library accreditation level and also net school spending numbers. Okay. Expenses FY14 through FY17 by category. You see there the largest one at the very bottom, the $9,347,000 is education. Then you have the one, let's see, oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at FY14. FY17's is $10 million and some change. As far as employee benefits go is the next highest one, and that's $1.7 million. And then see if we can color code this here. It looks like then we have public safety, public works, general government, and then everything else is much smaller.
What's the number for public
Oh, I
works?
have a pointer. I'm so sorry. I forgot my toys. So this right here is education. The red is employee benefits. The, I don't even know what color that is public safety, highway, general government, and everything else is very tiny. John, did you have another question?
No, that explained it, thanks.
Okay, cool. I have to switch my things here, okay. Budget changes from requested to recommended. Department submitted requests that totaled $16.4 million in change. Our recommendations included $776,000 less than requested. And as of Monday night, our balance was $190.56 to play with. We don't want to spend it all in one place. Expense breakdown. This is about when the pencil breaks. Okay, so general government's the first piece. I broke these down into segments so we could take each segment at a time. There's a color code up on the chart. Red means the funding increase. Green means funding decreased. Wages at the 2% level are in blue, and black means level funding. So we'll go through each of these independently. If you have any questions for it, if you could let me know. First one is the Select Board Town Administrator expenses. So over here you have FY14 actuals, 15 actuals, FY16 budget as modified, that is what BAM means, and FY17 recommended. So let's go through the increases first. You have the selectmen increases, which increased from 1,700 to 2,274. That's for the purposes of getting some training in for the selectmen, having some consultants come in for some training. The next one, that's all that increased in that section. Savings down below here, administration expenses decreased. I didn't have the procurement training for this year. And town report, we agreed to reduce it to $500, which is half, because we were able to put it online and get it out to folks that way for the majority of it. The blue lines are the town administrator salary and the administrative assistant wages, which both increased by 2% on FY16's budget as modified numbers. Questions on that piece? Okay.
Okay, yes. I'm just wondering about people who can't get the town report online, Heather.
We will have hard copies, Gary. We will print $500 worth of hard copies. And from the time I got here, we had never actually gone through all of our town reports. Last year, we reduced it to 1,000 and went through the majority of them because we distributed them at town meeting. If left to people's own devices to come in and pick them up, a lot fewer go. So, but we will have them available for anyone who wants them. And if not, there's always a hard copy that all departments get. So Barbara will have a copy at the library if people want to come in and look at it and so forth. So it'll be available for viewing. Next section is town hall expenses. We have the photocopier, lease and supplies, which is about $3,000. We actually pulled from this number the prior copy paper that we used to budget for the police station. We gave them the money and they now get to buy their own paper. Mike's very happy, I can tell. Gas and electric for Larrabee is about $27,000. We had gone back and forth on this number. We are still getting the reduced rate at the GDF Suez, and if the net solar metering credits pass, we're not sure when they would go into effect, but we do believe that they would start impacting us as soon as they do. We just don't know how far. Is it the end of this calendar year? Is it the beginning of next fiscal? How long does it take for the project to be moved? What's the weather going to be, which is the best question?
It's just a minor question, but
Sure.
we've got town hall expenses, then we talk about Larrabee. Are we, I thought
We are no longer, we will change everything that says Larrabee to Town Hall.
Okay.
And anything that says Town Hall to the Police Department.
okay, because we had discussed that in the beginning, yeah.
Yep. So we've actually, we won't be talking about any of the Police Department building expenses until we get to the Police Department's budget. Okay. Let's see, last one is Larrabee building expenses. We actually reduced to $20,000. We're hoping, oop, I'm pushing buttons, Charlie. Okay, I got it. We're actually hoping at the $20,000 that we've reduced a lot of one-time emergency things that happened last year. Plus, in the fall, should the stretch code pass at town meeting, we're hoping to apply for the Green Communities Program and be awarded a grant in order which to pursue some of the energy issues that we have in the building. Questions? All good? Okay. All right, second page, town-wide expenses. So we have various things here. We'll go through the ones that went up again. So the first one is 17.5 for postage. It went up about $2,000. We have an election this year, presidential, that as of this point is very contested, which means everyone who can show up is probably going to request an absentee ballot. So that being the case, you try to plan ahead and increase for the potential of the absentee ballots like crazy. If that number for some reason doesn't go up, then we can always approach this at a town meeting in January. Another expense that went up was, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. They just send us a rate and we pay. And it looks like it went up by $21, give or take. The next one that went up was the reverse 911 system. So this is for our Code Red. We've never put this in our budget before. We just have always relied on the grant. And this is something if the board doesn't feel they wish to pursue funding, but from conversations it appeared that they did wish to pursue it, we can still apply for the EMD, Emergency Management Grant, to supplement some of this fund. And that is there. And then we left in $250 for the emergency management expenses, which we reduced. Previous years, we pulled from this $3,000 number for the Code Red account. We're hoping that $250, that will cover anything that's incremental or a small cost. If there's any major disaster, we're going to have to be pulling from a larger department anyway, or finding additional reserves or funds. That account won't supplement or support it. Going upwards, you have $2,263 for Hampshire Council of Governments. That's the number they told us that we are now allocated, so we have plugged that in. They must have reduced their rate. Up here you have employment advertising. We started this line last year because one of the biggest problems we ran into, folks didn't know when people in their department were going to leave, didn't know when they were going to retire, and we kept getting stuck trying to supplement out of everyone's budget the cost to post and advertise for jobs. So this has actually been used quite a bit so far this year, but due to the funding constraints, we reduced it to $500. Legal expenses, we also reduced to $25,000. We do not have the major legal cases we had running into the fiscal year this year. We don't have the Leduc case or the UML case. We also had an unemployment case in district court that has since wrapped up. So at this point, we're just dealing with administrative cases, and everything else is covered by the insurance. And then you have about $600 a month on day-to-day legal issues. Any questions on that section? Okay. Technology. Things that have changed. Internet service actually went down $1,200. It went down because, like we were paying other bills and paper for the police department, we were for some reason paying the internet bill for the highway garage. So Randall now has money to pay his own internet bill, and life is happier in my office. Down here, web page maintenance went up to $600 because we pay very minimal for the Bluehost. We did run into an issue this year where we ran out of data and had to pay more, and everything was a disaster for a very short period of time. So to avoid that in the future, we're just hoping to buy additional data off the top at the beginning of the fiscal so that we don't have to worry about that again. Questions? Okay. All right, Finance Committee. They reduced the reserve fund from 17.3 to 10,000 because of the financial constraints. Town accountants lines. Again, the blue is just a 2% increase on the wages for the accountant and the assistant accountant. John, do you have a question?
I do have a question. You
Okay.
can tell as I lean forward, right? That's the question's going.
Well, you looked at me and the projector's over
The
there.
reserve fund, I mean, it's easy and it's nice to do, but is it practical?
10,000 for the reserve fund?
Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
we could-
historically, it's gone from 50,000 down to 30 and gone to, that's just the only fund left over for people who have issues.
Our philosophy was if we're looking at every line item and cutting things like town report budgets in half, that we should also try to do the same. Obviously, cutting our budget in half may inadvertently hurt another department's opportunity in the future, but to be frank, we haven't had a lot of requests this year, so the hope is that some of the fiscal management and the constant beating of the watch your numbers drum is starting to work a little bit among the departments, so they won't necessarily need the 17.3. I understand it puts us at a precarious situation if something bad comes up, but
I mean, that's the safety net.
Right.
Yeah, but
we have a lot of other line items that are to the penny, we're to meet the balanced budget
okay,
without sacrificing, to be honest, positions or services.
okay, thanks.
Mike, do you know how much you actually transferred this year?
2585 of 17.3.
But a lot comes in sometimes towards the end of the year, so that's.
Correct. We are more than likely going to receive some in the next few months, but at this point, with what we've had in requests and where we are, we felt that this was a good concession on our part.
Thanks.
Worst comes to worst, the transfer to town meeting.
We have to, yeah.
So in this line here, we also have the independent audit, which actually went up to 21.5. We are now doing a full Gatsby, what is it, Vicki, 41 compliance?
Pardon?
Gatsby, what's the number?
45,
40.
54, I forget, one of the two.
It's Gatsby compliant, so it includes the fixed assets that we had.
It's a full disclosed financial audit.
But
So-
we're compliant, that's all we need to
Yes,
know.
it's full disclosure financial audit is what Vicki said. So essentially, this year, we had budgeted for funding to actually have the fixed asset study, and now this year, we have already had it done once, so it's just a much smaller number to add in so that we can work on our financial health as we move forward. 865 is a reduction in the prior year's expenses, because this year we had budgeted in for Vicki to attend training classes to sit for an exam. Accounting software support went up because, as all things do over time, they tend to go up. Yes, ma'am?
On the independent audit, the question is, how often do we go out to bid, and is this a competitive rate?
We have not gone out to bid in a while. It's not one of those things that's required to. We can at any time. I think my understanding from working on this for a couple of years, we've been working with the same auditors, and one of the benefits of doing so is they recognize what's going on, and they're also able to work with us and actually see progress and see where we're going. So maybe once we resolve a couple of the issues that have been outstanding, that would be a great time to do it. I mean, the board can choose to go out to bid at any point in time. There's not a lot of options, though. I think there's only 2 or 3 firms that do it.
So one of the things that was discussed in the accounting classes, the annual that the Mass Department of Revenue puts on in March, was that you should have the auditors at your place for a minimum of 3 years. You can, at that point, decide to change. Most people don't, but it has to be, it's not a law per se, but it's good business practice to keep them for 3 years. And at that point, if you choose to change, you can. Most communities in Massachusetts don't, unless they have a horrible experience with the auditors that they have, so.
And how long have we had them?
As long as I've been here. I think David preceded me, he switched it one time, and it was horrible. I don't think it was, according to my assistant, since she was here, it wasn't a very good audit, and it just kind of, that was back in like 10 years ago or so. But there aren't, like Heather said, there aren't many choices in terms of good auditing firms that are in this area, because you don't really necessarily want someone to come trucking from Boston, because it's going to cost you more money. So, but we can certainly look at that and
I guess the
see.
question is, why did they go up so much this year, percentage-wise?
Because we are in that complete, it's to be full financial audit. Where previous years it was only partial, and now
Partials.
it's full, because we have the fixed asset piece, we have the OPEB piece.
Okay.
That's included in these audits.
So next year it'll probably go down because it's back to the partial audit?
No, every year it's going to be the same now
It'll be
going
full.
forward, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Okay, any more questions on the accounting piece? Okay, let's see if I can give the Board of Assessors a whirl here. So let's just go down from top to bottom here. Principal assessor, we did 2%. I'm not sure how we ended up, I think what we did was take the current rates, this budget as modified. Vicki, do you remember what we did here? Why the number's different?
Yeah, we took, what it was, 100.
Give us a few minutes, Gary, don't worry.
We should have taken Michael's rate, which was, well, I think it's 22 and some change, added 2% times his 31 hours times 52.2 weeks, which is what we did for the admin position, which was 25 hours, $15, $15.30, and the 2% for the 25 hours. So it's just whatever their rate was plus 2% times whatever their hours are times 52.2 weeks.
So just a straight calculation,
Correct.
okay. Do we know why, oh, maybe Mr. Swanson can explain why it differed?
Oh, you're going to want Mr. Swanson at the end here. He's going to have a few comments on this budget.
Actually, more favorable than you might expect.
Okay. So let's skip down on the two wage pieces for a minute. We can come back to Mr. Swanson when he gets up here. Assessor's expenses was decreased to 4187. We actually went through quite a bit, and they did a great job of detailing out all the courses. Unlike a lot of the boards, the Board of Assessors, each of the members has a short period of time from the point of election to actually get training. And the training, unlike some of them, is not free. It's costly, and you have to send them to wherever the training is, and it's not often in our backyard, is the problem. The next thing you see here is the assessor's software support. As all things do, software-related generally go up. It did. So the next couple things we'll take in stride here. We'll go down to the bottom. You see assessor's triannual reevaluation. So that's 12.5 that we budgeted for. The contracted amount for this that was signed was 10.5. However, there's always concern that that just covers the basics. You don't know if there's additional work or additional things that need to happen. So we wanted to budget up a little higher. The original amount that was requested was, I think it was 18.5. So we actually kind of played between and went on the lower side of it. On the assessor's consultant side, they asked for consultants this year, and we're at $3,000. For town maps, the reason at the time we had reduced it to 2,000 is because the funds had not been spent. As of this week, I believe there was a contract signed, though, to update all the GIS maps, and that was approximately $3,500. So this number right here is going to be under by $1,500, which we may want to look at. And then, let's see, what else do we have? I think I covered all of those pieces. Gary, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor this, but I just want to emphasize the important thing. Actually, I've got a little handout for the Finance Committee. You want to grab that, Mike? And, in the spirit of, well, first of all, acknowledging the fact that the assessors have been the bearer of rather bad news when it comes to balancing the budget. When we met yesterday, we figured we'd better do whatever we can to keep our costs down. And we did. And what we've done, first of all, we would like to recommend, we always used to have a wages item rather than breaking it out between principal and clerical. What you see, excuse me, I need one of those back.
You're gonna make me travel further down, aren't you?
Basically, what we've done is our mapping, the only thing that we're going to ask for additional funds for is the mapping itself. Heather already touched on this. This is very important. We're able now, we've just gone into a GIS, a digital system for our mapping. What used to have to be done by our assistant assessor, if you will, was that person always had to come up with the property data sheets, had to develop the abutters lists for conservation, anything that went on. With our digital mapping, this can all be done via the town webpage. Anybody can go on the town webpage now and say, I want a 300-foot abutters list around my subdivision. And they can develop this themselves. And we've seen it happen. We've required it of these people because we were short-staffed over the years. And it's worked out very well. They still got to get it certified by us. We'll check it through and make sure they haven't shortchanged anybody. But we're not generating the information. To do this, we need to keep the maps digitized. I mean, most of you have seen these, they're nice colored maps and everything, but that's not as important as the fact the $1,500 that was used as a basis for coming up with this $2,000, that was a cut and paste job we've done up until last year. Not digital. It had none of the computer, the downloading features that I just discussed. We've made a huge stride in this regard. What that's allowed us to do is we've reduced in the recommended budget that you have there, if you look at the lower thing, the detail of wage line item, we need more of our principal assessor. This guy is key to our whole operation. We put him in at 35 hours. I won't get into all the details. I'll go over it with the Finance Committee later, but his pay is actually up at the maximum we could have given him when we hired him. We only hired him provisionally at $22 an hour on a 90-day basis until he could prove himself out. Well, he's done more than that. This guy has been a great benefit to the town. We got to do whatever we can to, keep him, and we're trying to do that. But because we've got all this digital output now, we felt that we could reduce the assistant, the second position, to 16 hours. And we added at 25. That basically, if you look at the top, our total wages is the same as the Finance Committee wanted to give us, which is a reduction from what we've done before. But frankly, we've modernized. We can do with less in the wages column, and the board has voted to do exactly that. All right? But to be consistent with that, we've got to keep up our digital mapping. $2,000 is not going to cut it. As Heather said, we just signed a $3,500 contract a couple of weeks ago, and for the FY16, the map updating. The only reason it didn't cost more is we're cutting corners wherever we can. We're only having the pages done that have changed rather than having new sets done, which most people do. We're having just the pages done, we'll insert them into our set. We're being as cheap as we can with this thing, but it's still costing us $3,500 in order to do it right. And I've estimated $4,000 simply because the $3,500 was based on, it's their cost based on how many changes they have to make. If there's more changes to be made, subdivisions, non-subs, whatever, it's going to cost more. $4,000 is a reasonable figure to carry on this. That is really the only increase that the Board of Assessors is asking for at this point, is $2,000. Forget the nickels and dimes that you see on this thing. That's just...
So all that presentation, you want to
$2,000, and we're happy.
And change it. And wages.
That's not us, but as long as the salary, right, no. As long as the salary's there, that's something we can keep in the budget. Now, $2,000, Gary, for this year, we'll digitize all the maps? Or 4,000 total, 2,000 more?
4,000 total, 2,000 increase.
And year after year, what happens? You just add to those maps that you have already, the changes?
Well, sooner or later, we're going to have to come up with a whole set, because we're going
Right.
to wear them out.
Right.
But
So-
the $3,500 to $4,000 in that range is about what we see is necessary to keep up this level of technology.
That sounds like a good plan.
It is.
Anybody else?
So
have
maybe a recommendation I would make is to send the Board of Assessors budget to the Finance Committee on Monday, just to figure out where to put things in which line item. But I think for the most part, their balance is would stay the same. They just want a reshuffling of the numbers. And that 2,000, I mean, we can keep an eye out as we go through on the $2,000. But essentially, I think if we sent it to the board, to the Finance Committee, it would be a better time piece, if the board doesn't object.
I move that-
Of this meeting with that.
I move to send it to the Finance Committee for review.
Second?
Second.
Just a comment. I mean, personally, I think if we can digitize for $2,000, we should really put that in our recommendation to find that somewhere. Right?
4,000.
2,000 more. Yeah. So, with that, any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Just to be clear, we can't address the $35 in the 16 hours for the finance.
We can't, no, the Finance Committee can't, yeah. You can run that through the PQB, I would.
I'll go through proper procedures
Right.
with that. I don't want to
Yeah.
lose this.
We're concerned about the total dollars, and that seems to be right on track.
Bottom line is, if you just give us a wage item and stop trying to micromanage, let us manage the wages, and we can do a good job.
I personally, I'd like to keep the two lines in there so we know what's going on. I mean, we're not micromanaging, we're just asking for different positions, I think.
I've moved on. Am I okay to move on?
You're okay.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to come back to the wage pieces on these in a second. I'm just going to address the other lines, and then I'll do the wages at the same time. So down in the town clerk section, you see a lot of things that are red. These are the town clerk expenses, have gone up slightly to $1,465 instead of $900. The election registration wages and expenses went up. Couple things are happening this year. Number one, the presidential's in November. Number two, the state has found it to be a genius idea to do early voting right before the presidential election. We don't really know what this is going to mean, but folks can, to the best of my knowledge, come in up to 10 days ahead of time and vote. So instead of an absentee ballot, instead of going on Tuesday, the day of the election, to vote, they can come in, and the town clerk's offices are actually encouraged to hold additional days and hours for folks to come in to be available to vote. So I don't know how many people are going to show up at the poll, but at the end of the day, we have to account for some additional staffing and additional supplies and the like for these pieces. The other thing that we did not budget in is the potential of having our elections actually audited. They've never done this before, and it would be at our expense. They will randomly draw who they want to do it and figure out what's happening from there. But given the number of towns and cities in the state of Massachusetts and the lack of concern that we've often have over time, we thought we were relatively safe. Should we actually get to the point where it's a couple $100s or $1,000, we do have the reserve fund, or we can go back to special town meeting if we need to account for those funds. In the treasurer's office, a couple numbers went down. You see that the expenses actually went down, and this one's a lie. This should be red, I'm sorry. The treasurer software support went up like all the other software pieces. Now,
Can you go back to the town board, please?
Sure.
And explain the salaries?
yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
I thought you were up at the tax.
Yeah, it was, because I wanted to, remember I said I wanted to do all the salaries at the end?
Okay.
Okay. So town clerk assistant wages and treasurer collector wages, Treasurer collector wages right here is your assistant treasurer collector and your administrative support. They're grouped together. Those are 2% on the FY16 piece. So going to the treasurer collector salary and the town clerk salary, these are two elected officials. If you know, remember, or recall, each year at the annual town meeting, we vote on the fixed salaries of elected officials, which at this point in time includes just these two individuals because no one else is getting any pay as an elected official. Last year, before we started the collective bargaining piece, the Board of Selectmen had agreed that they would compensate all non-union employees the same as union employees where it came down to COLA. So union employees got 2%, non-union employees got a 2%. We went to the town meeting in January, and that was the same presentation. We had checked with DLR in this piece, or we received communication and correspondence, that actually said, although we could do that with all town officials, we could not do that with elected officials. You cannot change the fixed salary of elected officials once the tax rate is set. So because we had set the tax rate in November, and we're now in January of 2016, we cannot change the salaries. So everyone else's pay went up by 2%, except in FY16, the treasurer collector, and the town clerk salary remained the same as it was at the beginning of the year. They were not able to get retro pay on this piece. So in FY17, and when we were at the annual town meeting, and even leading up to it, we had said that in good faith, we would do our best efforts to put them aligned with everyone else. The numbers you see here are not 2% on 2% like other folks' are. They're actually a little bit more. This is what we did for the math. We took the FY16 number. This is the number they're getting as of today. Remember, it does not include any percentage raise. We put 2% on it, and we said, okay, so this is the number we should be starting FY17 as if any other person was here, or any other position. We added 2% onto that. So the FY17 number started out with 2% on 2%. But then we said, wait a minute. These people did not get compensated for the FY16 check that everyone else got. They've never gotten it. They will never get it. So the only way to compensate that piece is you take the check amount, say it was $900, and you throw it on top of the salary base. So it's over 4%. It looks closer when you look at the numbers to 6% than 4%. And it looks out of whack in a sense. However, we did say we were going to compensate in good faith and keep everyone aligned to all the other employees, and that's what these numbers represent. If the board wishes to modify, has questions or what have you, but this is what was proposed and what we've sat down with FinCom finance team and went over.
I mean, it
But
does
I
cal-
can understand concerns and.
it does
so forth.
calculate almost 6%.
Yes.
But I guess my concern is that it's fair versus the other employees, and if it is, that's where it comes out.
So if any other employee was, let me know if you'd like me to represent the other arguments, or if I can. So every other employee was given a check this year, and then was paid the rest of the remaining
The check was
calendar
for
year.
the retroactive?
It was retro, and then the rest of the fiscal year, that 2% went into effect.
Right, no, I just want people at home to know it was retro and.
Retro, yep.
It brought
So
it
at the end of
even.
the year, say my increase was $1,000. During the course of 2016, I got, sorry, my phone is vibrating down here, and it's very distracting. So over the course of the year, let's say I got $1,000 more in FY16 by the end of the year than at the beginning. The treasurer collector and the town clerk did not receive that, will not
Right.
receive that.
Right.
They will be on the right pay scale when we get to next year with everyone else. They will have increased by 4% overall from the beginning of FY16. However, they never got the check that everyone else got over the course of FY16 because of this. The argument on the other side is that they're elected officials and they're different and they should be treated differently. They have other benefits and other comps that they get that other employees don't have, whether they use them or they don't use them. Going back to the salaries themselves, this puts them in the same line. Is it legal to do? There should be no issue with doing it. They're fixed salaried employees. You can increase in elected officials to whatever number you want to increase it to. It's a fixed salary.
Right.
That means they work one day or 480 days of the year, if there were that many, and they get the same pay.
So,
Go ahead, Vicki.
just so everybody knows, they're getting the same 2% that everybody else got. They're getting the retroactive back to the beginning of the fiscal year and 2% going forward into 17. Is that right?
Math doesn't work,
The math doesn't work.
no. So if you look at the 2 years as a whole, everyone in 16 got 2%.
Right.
And then, so they got 2% in 16, 2% in 17. That's 4% total.
Correct.
They're getting 4% total in 17 plus the 2%. So that's 6% versus 4%. There's a
you're saying
difference
these
between
numbers
6
are
and
too
4.
high?
They're too high.
Okay.
If you look at it as a 2-year total, you didn't get anything in 16, you got 0%. But in 17, you got a total of 4%, because you take 16 plus 2%, and then you add the other 2%.
Okay.
It's going to be spread out over the whole year, because you cannot pay any salaries unless you've actually earned them first. We have documentation from Department of Revenue, so I can't just give anyone a lump sum because they would have gotten it last year.
So it sounds like town accountant is disagreeing with the numbers, and we have finance committee right behind. Can we hear from Mike?
If you have 0% in 16, and you have 2% and 2% in 17, that's 4%.
I hear, yeah.
It's 4 and 4 equals 4. I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of the math I learned when I was in school, but, and if you add this, the retro from 16, that's 6%. I'm not getting 6%, I'm getting 2%, and 2% is 4%. No one else is getting 6%, they're getting 4. There's a difference. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get it in 17, it's just not going to be one lump sum check like everybody else.
Right.
Because you're still going to increase it to the 17 level, then take another 2%. So you're still getting what the salary would have been over the course of the entire year.
So they're not losing anything, including
Not
the retro,
losing
you're
anything.
saying?
Correct.
Okay. Mike?
But
Just echoing Vicky's math, just to put a figure to it, it is $1,700. If we talk about cutting $500 town reports and $100 budgets, I think it's important to recognize the math and what the 4% versus the 6% means, and if it means $1,700 saved, then it's a saving.
So you're agreeing with Vicky's calculation? And the $1,700 difference for the both positions total?
Correct.
Okay.
It's 1714.57, so $1,714.57.
Okay. Donna, you want to let everybody know who you are? The other two came up
Donna
already.
Wiley, treasurer collector. I just want you to know where the logic came from. So my current salary for fiscal 16 is $49,963.42. If I multiply that point by 2%, it comes up to $999.27. That would have been what I got additional had I been able to get a retro for this year, okay? So if I take the 49,963 and I add the 999.27, it comes to 50,962.27. And then I add 2% for the fiscal 17. So that's what it would have been for 16 had I gotten the raise, but I didn't.
Right.
And then I add 2% on top of that for 17, which is what everyone else is getting. That adds an additional $1,019.24, 25 cents, 24.5. Okay? So that would be
51,982 roughly?
962.27 plus 1,000. 51,981 or thereabouts. So that's what I would be getting going into 17. But I still didn't get the 2% like everyone else did that was retro for this year.
So
So
te-
this is where, for
Okay.
Janine and I, it comes in because we didn't get that 2%.
I think the difference I'm seeing here is that you're saying you're owed $1,000 retro that you didn't get, but this is putting it into the base, which means it goes forward all the time.
But,
Should be a one-time
well-
payment,
Well,
right? Versus a lump sum. Like everybody else.
but if we know that going into it, so I mean, it's up to the, it's up to you guys, but next year, for fiscal 18, if a 2% raise is given, it would go back to what the original fiscal 17 amount would have been. So it's basically going to stay the same for the following year.
I'm not seeing that. I'm saying it would be added on top. I mean, let me ask a question. Is there a way that we can, where's Heather? Heather, is there a way that we can do a retro to make that right and then lower this by?
So we've looked at different options. I don't think we can do, as we discussed earlier, you can't do a retro because it's a fixed salary thing. You can change the base salary piece. We did talk at the Finance Committee again. I don't even know what day it was. It was several weeks ago, is all I could guess. And we did discuss about just making a note that that piece was included, so that when we start FY18 budgeting, we take that piece out to begin with, and then we do the base salary on the 2% and 2%, and not anything else. So that has been discussed, and we can notate it like anything else. It all comes down to people paying attention and acting in good faith.
If I remember, it was discussed, but not necessarily encouraged, correct? Because then you're being asked to remember something 365 days from now. It's not properly documented somewhere, you lose it. And it's sort of, that percentage is built into that rate forever, right? So then, every time you get a 2%, you're compounding on that original retro act.
Right. Good.
I suggested this get moved back to the finance team.
We can move it back, but it sounds like they have an answer. They want to change this number according to what I'm just hearing, and so does town accountant. Is that correct?
So I will speak, I guess, on this. So we have done some math. We have looked at it. I don't think sending it back to us is the best way to deal with it, because we would have to vote, but
Okay. So,
I don't want to speak for the group, but I don't think it's necessarily our decision to decide how you appropriate funds for elected officials, because, I mean, on a personal level, if it's an elected official, I don't think you should be going through extra steps to make things equal in these situations. That's why people choose to be elected, right? So I think the select board is taking a step to be fair and equitable to the individuals. I personally don't necessarily agree with that 100%. So sending it back to us to decide on an initiative the select board is putting forward may not be the best route.
can I ask you why you advanced it if you didn't agree with it at this level? Because it sounds like you would have said 51 on the first one and 980. But this
So
is
it
coming.
was just an afterthought with doing math and looking at it. I mean, we've been meeting for months looking at this, and it's something that just came up. We did some extra math and found out about it.
Okay.
I feel it's good to bring to attention because it's an equitable situation in regards to positions, but it's also a financial impact when we talk about dollars and cents. It's $1,700.
Just not equitable going forward because it's on the base. That's always a concern. You want the microphone?
Well, I don't want to be in a situation where the selectmen are endorsing something in the finance committee. The microphone's right there, John.
Oh, okay. I don't know if they can hear you.
It's like having my mother sit next to me. I just don't want to see the finance committee and the board of selectmen at odds at town meeting. I want to make sure finance committee is on the same page with this budget. This is one of those lines where you can debate this back and forth. I can understand the merits both ways. I don't like putting it in the base pay.
So right now, the finance team, including the whole of the finance committee, and Heather and the accountant and everyone has put forth a balanced budget. Some extra information was found out after we put forth that budget. It's a possible cost savings for the select board. I don't think, I honestly don't know. I kind of
That's
defer to
fair.
you for this
That's
situation,
fair,
because this is
because we're all
your
trying to
initiative,
figure out
yeah.
the fairest way to approach this. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I'm
I know.
searching, but I can't find
Yeah.
an answer for you.
But, Jackie, you have any thoughts on this?
No, I'm listening.
Okay.
John Fitzpatrick again, just a couple of questions. Is it true that you can't, did I hear that you can't cut a check for the retro part? So you can't do that? And they're elected positions, so the town sort of decides what it pays its elected officials. What if the town decided that it was going to have a 2-year correction. I mean, math is math, right? So if you want dollars to flow into a position over a period of time, why not figure out how you do that? And I don't, and make it so that the base ends up where it should be, and maybe over a 2-year period of time, you could do that. Maybe you send it back to someplace, but it seems to me that you come out of here with a solution that says, we want it to be equitable, do it over the period of time that makes sense, and it's just math. And if it becomes part of the base, just make sure you end up where you want to end up at a certain time.
It's a little more complicated because you got to figure it out precisely. We can't do
But you got
it,
to figure it out.
but we
It's a
can't
lot
do
of
it at this
numbers.
table. It would,
Yeah.
yeah, it would take too long. So I guess we leave it in there for now, and we try to figure out a way to make it equitable as we go forward.
Amanda Kemp, member of the Finance Committee. The only objection I personally have to this, and I know we discussed it the other night at the Finance Committee, is we're trying to circumvent the law. And so the law distinctly says that you can't pay retro pay to an elected official,
Right.
and we're trying to figure out a way to circumvent that. I think we are making an effort to be equitable by giving the raise, but in order to do this, you're circumventing something that the government has already said you can't do. And so that's my personal objection to it.
What do you mean, we're not?
DOR says we can't give them a retro check, so now we're trying to figure out a way
Okay.
to allocate them that money when we've already been told it's something we cannot do because they are elected.
So by adding it to the base fiscal 17, you're saying
We're
that's a retro, and it's,
And
okay.
we're circumventing
That's a
something
whole
we've been
nother
told we
question
can't
then.
do.
Because if you don't call it a retro, do you call it a raise? And how many other individuals are getting more of a raise, correct?
But-
It's a sticky situation.
But just to clarify, because I think this is a troubling direction if it's not corrected, it's not that you can't do retro. Remember I said you can't change fixed salaries after the tax rate is set. So if we were talking about things in October of 15 and not January of 16, this wouldn't be an issue. This would have already been done. The only reason we can't do it is because the tax rate was set. So it's not that you can't do retro in a year because the tax rate was set, so you can't change their pay at that point. Again, if it was October, we wouldn't even be having this discussion because we would have probably just did it. So we're not so much circumventing, we're just trying to say, okay, if this had been October and not January, this would have gone much smoother. Now we're just trying to backtrack to the status we would have been in October. But ultimately, I concur, it's the Board of Selectmen's decision. You're the policymakers for the town. It's your decision to set the direction.
Well, the clear thing is we want to make sure it's not illegal. And if it's
We-
brought up that it may be illegal, we want to verify that
We
it's
have a
not.
call out to DLR, so I haven't heard anything back from them on any concern piece, and we're playing phone tag right now.
Okay, so until that's clear, we're not going to make it, at least I don't want to make a decision. I don't know about the other two of us.
No,
When do we have to make a decision before town meeting?
Well, the warrant needs to be voted on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. Finance Committee meets on Monday. So I'm cool with flagging these two things and coming back to them later, but ultimately, there needs to be direction on what to do with this stuff before next Tuesday, or we're not going to have a warrant to vote on.
So let me ask this question. If it is okay to do we want to do it? That's the next question.
Well, that's,
That's the
and maybe
question
that's
here.
a question to hear, because if the answer is no, we can take it out. But if the board votes yes, provided there's no legal impediments,
My concern is we make it equitable, but not overdo it, because other people are going to say, well, you did it for one, why can't you do it for the other? So I guess my thought would be, take off the $1,000 and give the 51,980 to make it equitable, and we missed a year, but because of an elected official, that's,
That's the way it is.
I didn't want to say it that way, because I don't mean to sound crass, that's.
No, but the reality of it, I agree with you, John. So I'll move that we use the 2%, and not worry about the retroactive.
Here a second?
second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So, that'd be the direction.
we go with this slide? Cool. Okay, general government total. You see the total for FY14 actuals, 15, 16, and then 17. I apologize, you don't have any cool graphs on charts on this one, but Randall had already gone home when I got to this piece. So my IT help had left. But you'll see that from FY16 to FY17, it actually reduced by about $8,000, give or take. Public safety, police department. So again, I'm going to go through the same way, starting with the reds. So we have here, numbers that went up were police department expenses, 25,000 is police equipment maintenance, 27,000 is custodial-related expenses. So what, and that actually, I'm sorry, police department building / custodial-related expenses. What this is, do you remember earlier, John, you were talking about town hall versus Larrabee building? Yes. So we thought it was time, and I know we've had conversations with the police chief, who seems to be okay with this, of giving the bills for that building back to the police chief who operates and runs that building. There was a period of time where I was making decisions on light bulbs for a building I wasn't in, and it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So this puts the expenses between custodial and also building expenses over to that department. Going back up, you see all the wage lines. They're generally in blue. For the most part, we did 2% increase across the board on all of those based on what was currently budgeted. The one number that seems a little higher is the communication wages. We always seem to be off on communication wages, so we try to figure out what we're actually going to spend this year and get closer to that number and 2%. Communication is one of those things that you actually can't really cut if you're going to have a full-time dispatch, because it's one person on as a dispatcher, and if that one person's out for whatever reason, you need to fill the position. And this year, we did have one who was out on medical for a small period of time, but that's one of those times where you pay someone 75% who's not there, and you still have to fill the shift. And we are looking at 911 communication grant to look at seeing what we can utilize it for communication wages, to cover trainings and the like. Anyone in the audience have a question?
Right after this, or you want to go?
Cool.
I've got a question.
Yes.
And I guess it's to the chief. Obviously, when you put in your request, chief, it was for substantially more than what this is coming out at for wages. Is this going to, what is this going to do to the police department, maintaining it at this level versus what you requested? Oh. It looks like you had a request of 663. Can't tell without the lights, but.
I could see it fine, Jim.
Yeah, but your mother has harder,
I know your
bad sight.
mom has got issues.
You know, I took that as a compliment, because I'm sure his mom is nice.
It wasn't a negative.
So the 663 was, I wanted to get some money for training for the sending officers and other things. But looking at it, and what was given was more than what I had this past fiscal year.
Okay, so you're comfortable that staffing?
So I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
You know, it's still not going to get me to where I wanted just for training purposes, you know,
But it maintains the
maintains
staffing?
what I have, and
Okay,
yes.
that's the key part. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions on this budget?
I don't think so, but before you go on, I think we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Is that good, everybody? Yep. Okay. We'll be back in 5 minutes, Paul.